Welcome back to Wayback, and this season we're gonna shift focus a bit. We've been reviewing games that came out in prior years, but for the next several episodes we're going to have a look back at consoles. We'll get ideas of their libraries, interesting tidbits, and looks at the hardware. To kick it all off, we're going to be going back to May of 1986 and the debut of the Atari 7800 Pro system. As indicated by the model number, it's the third console released in the Atari VCS line that started with the 2600. The 5200 hadn't been out for that long, but it was suffering a bit compared to the other 8-bit consoles of the time. The 7800 had some beefed up hardware, but also shrunk the cartridge size back down from the prior console, so they matched more closely with the 2600 style. This and a little bit of clever engineering allowed backwards compatibility without the clunky add-on required by the 5200, a console first. Inside was a 6502 processor that more closely mirrored processors found in arcade machines rather than other consoles. Combined with the Maria graphics chip, the 7800 treated everything on screen as a sprite, rather than a block of tiles. This meant it could handle a load of moving objects all at once with a stunning amount of color for its time. Games like Ball Blazer played to that strength, but it also meant things like side-scrolling platformers were a bit tough to pull off. Sadly, Atari made the decision to keep the 10-year-old TIA chip that only allowed for 2 channels of occasionally painful sound. In my opinion, this was the main thing that held it back. Games looked great and the arcade ports were often spot on, but everything still sounded like the 2600, save the 2 games that added a special audio chip called the Pokey into the cartridge, Ball Blazer and Commando. Listening to what could have been possible with the Pokey integrated into the console itself almost makes me a little sad. This is what every game could have sounded like. The controller was also simplified, returning to a joystick with only 2 buttons, rather than the telephone-style number pad that was all the rage at the time. The American controller was a sort of a long bar with a joystick poking up out of the top half. The triggers were on the sides of the bottom half, requiring you to press them with the hand that was gripping the body of the controller. A revised controller released in Europe, and it was miles better, mimicking the D-pad and button configuration of the NES and Master System, but managing to look smashing in comparison. A respectable 13 games were available on launch, including the likes of Miss Pac-Man, Dig Dug, Food Fight, and Robotron 2084. And if that sounds arcade-heavy, you're right. The only non-arcade game available on release was the aforementioned Ball Blazer. Despite the strong start, Atari ran up hard against Nintendo's draconian licensing agreements, resulting in a total library of only 59 games over the 5 years the console was on the market. Amusingly enough, though, Atari managed to turn those policies back on Nintendo for a few games. Publishers were generally barred from releasing ports of NES games on other consoles, but there was a loophole allowed for arcade game publishers to release home ports of games that they'd brought to arcades. Through this, you'll see titles like Double Dragon, Xenophobe, Rampage, even the original Mario Brothers on this arcade master. The Pro System was officially retired from sale in 1991, but 10 years later, in 2001, the lockout algorithm was reverse engineered and unleashed on a hungry homebrew community. Over the years, several new cartridges have been released for the console, such as Ricky and Vicky, a puzzler released in 2019 on this beautiful clear orange cartridge. So what are your thoughts? Any nostalgia for Atari's Pro System? Is this the first you're hearing of it? Let me know in the comments below or on Twitter at TesseractUnfold. Meanwhile, like, subscribe, spread the word, and I'll be back next week.